Olivia Whitmore had always been the strong, independent one in her family. Yet no matter how much she achieved, it was never enough. Her parents always favoured her brother Ethan, the golden child, while she was left in the shadows. But when her grandfather passed away, something unexpected happened. At the will reading, Olivia's family tried to steal what was rightfully hers, but they didn't count on her standing up for herself. What happened next would change everything, as Olivia discovered not just her inheritance, but her voice. This is the story of reclaiming what's always been hers. Olivia Whitmore had long grown accustomed to being the invisible one in her family. As a child, she had always felt like she was the shadow that followed her younger brother Ethan, the golden boy, everywhere he went. From the moment they were born, it seemed as though Ethan had been given everything, love, attention and approval, while Olivia was left to fend for herself. She became fiercely independent, excelling in everything she did, but never receiving any recognition from her parents. It was always about Ethan. It had been that way for as long as Olivia could remember. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how many accomplishments she stacked up, her parents always looked past her, turning their gaze toward Ethan. He was their project. He was the one they nurtured and praised, the one they poured all their attention into, while she quietly played the role of the responsible, capable daughter who needed no assistance. Olivia could handle everything on her own, so they never bothered to look too closely. They never had to. She had done everything right. In school, she was a model student, acing every test, leading every project. At home, she kept the house clean, took care of herself and stayed out of trouble. But it was never enough. No one seemed to care. Not even when she earned a scholarship to a top university. Not even when she landed her first job in design, a position that many would have envied. But Ethan? He was the constant source of their pride. He wasn't the best student. He wasn't the most hard-working. He barely scraped by in school, and his decisions were often impulsive. Yet every time he stumbled into a new opportunity, their parents jumped at the chance to help him. Olivia had stopped counting how many times her parents had praised Ethan for small achievements that barely seemed to matter, like his ability to find an internship that, in her opinion, was a stepping stone he didn't deserve. Every time Olivia did something remarkable, they'd smile and say, "Well, we expected that from you." The birthday party that marked her 30th year was a striking reminder of everything that was wrong with her family dynamic. She had been excited, hoping for even a hint of recognition. But instead, Ethan received the attention once again. While Olivia spent the evening alone, stuck in the background, Ethan basked in the glow of the spotlight. The family gathered to celebrate him, congratulating him for something so trivial, so meaningless. She could hardly believe it. Ethan had simply gotten a new car. A gift for his hard work, despite his lack of consistent effort. At her own party, Olivia found herself stuck at the kitchen counter, watching everyone shower Ethan with compliments. The bright balloons and colourful decorations lost in the background. She had spent months preparing for her birthday, hoping for something special, something to mark the fact that she was finally 30, but it seemed as if everyone else had forgotten. As she stood there, serving drinks and smiling politely, the ache inside her grew. Her parents didn't even notice. Her mother had once told her, "You don't need us like Ethan does." The words echoed in her mind as Olivia realised the painful truth. She was simply an afterthought. They didn't care about her achievements because they didn't need to. She was strong. She could take care of herself, so they didn't have to invest any more time in her. She was, in their eyes, just the reliable daughter who would always be fine. That night, in the quiet of her room, Olivia stared at the ceiling, feeling more invisible than ever. She had always known her parents were more invested in Ethan, but now it was undeniable. As the years went by, Olivia's desire to prove herself to them grew weaker. She no longer tried to impress them. She kept her successes to herself, choosing to live a life that didn't rely on their approval. But the hurt never went away. At 30, she had everything anyone could want: a successful career, her own apartment, and a life she had built from the ground up. But all of it felt hollow. The one thing she wanted, the one thing she'd never received, was the approval and love of her parents. She could see now that she wasn't going to get it. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she even wanted it anymore. It was time to stop looking for validation from people who had never given it. Olivia was tired of being the strong one, the one who had to keep everything together while Ethan played in the background. She had spent so many years trying to fit into a family that couldn't see her. But now she was ready to live for herself, to stop seeking their approval and start building a life where she didn't need it. And that was exactly what she planned to do. As Olivia navigated her life, carving out a path that was entirely her own, she couldn't escape the persistent feeling of loneliness that haunted her. She had always been the strong one, the reliable daughter, the one who could stand on her own 2 feet without asking for help. But as time went on, it became clearer to her that no amount of independence could fill the void left by a family that had never truly seen her. Her achievements were hers alone, and that should have been enough, right? But it wasn't. Every victory, every milestone seemed to fall flat when there was no one there to share it with. Sure, Olivia had friends, good friends, who loved and supported her, but even they couldn't understand what she was going through. They would smile and nod when she mentioned her latest accomplishment, but there was a certain distance in their eyes. They didn't know what it felt like to be constantly overlooked by the people who should have been proud of her, her own family. She would sit at lunch with friends, listening to them talk about their parents, the way their families celebrated their achievements and milestones. It wasn't a competition, but it made Olivia feel like she was the odd one out. She had never experienced that kind of support. The support her friends spoke of was foreign to her, a fantasy that only existed in the stories they told. She had tried over the years to talk to her parents, to get them to understand. She had hoped that one day they would look at her and see how far she had come. But each time she spoke about her accomplishments, it felt like she was talking to a wall. They would offer her polite smiles, maybe a few words of approval, but there was always a certain emptiness in their response. The conversations would always circle back to Ethan, her younger brother, who had never had to work as hard as Olivia, but who was always the one in the spotlight. The golden boy. It was hard for Olivia to accept, but she had spent so much of her life chasing after her parents' approval, only to realize that it would never come. Ethan's life was always front and center. He was the one who got the calls, the visits, the praise. Olivia was the daughter who didn't need anything, who could handle herself. She became the afterthought in every conversation, every family gathering, and every holiday. Even when she needed support, it was Ethan who received it. The more Olivia thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just about attention. It wasn't about her parents not appreciating her achievements. It was deeper than that. It was about love, the love that Olivia had always longed for, but had never truly received. Her parents loved Ethan, and while they cared for her in their own way, it was never the same. She felt it in every glance they shared, every smile they gave him. She was the strong one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need their love. But it hurt. It hurt more than she cared to admit. She tried to distract herself, work, friends, new hobbies, but nothing seemed to fill the emptiness. When she had a quiet moment alone, she couldn't stop the thoughts from creeping in. What was wrong with her? Why did Ethan get all the love and attention? Why couldn't her parents see how hard she had worked? It felt like an endless cycle of longing, a cycle that she didn't know how to break. She had always thought that one day, when she achieved enough, when she became successful enough, they would finally notice her. But that day never came. One night, after another long day at work, Olivia sat in her small apartment and scrolled through social media. She watched her friends post pictures of family gatherings, of their parents at graduation ceremonies, celebrating their accomplishments. And there it was again, that hollow feeling, the one that always crept in when she realised that she would never have that. She would never have the parents who cheered for her when she succeeded, the parents who believed in her. She closed her laptop with a sigh, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her chest. She had tried so hard to be someone her family could be proud of, but all it had gotten her was a lifetime of feeling invisible. Olivia had learned how to live without their approval, but it was a hard lesson to swallow. It was one thing to survive without support, but it was another to realise that the very people who should have been her biggest cheerleaders were the ones who pushed her aside. As the days passed, Olivia's frustration grew. She continued to do her best, to create a life that was meaningful to her, but the emptiness remained. She had achieved so much on her own, but it still didn't feel like enough. Every time she thought about it, the realization settled deeper in her chest. Her family would never see her the way they saw Ethan. And for the first time, Olivia wasn't sure if she could keep living in the shadow of someone who would always be their priority. When Olivia received the news that her grandfather had passed away, it felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. There was no flood of grief, no rush of tears. Instead, she felt a deep, hollow ache in her chest. Her grandfather had been the only person in her family who had ever truly seen her. He was the one who, despite all the chaos and neglect in her household, had taken the time to listen, to offer kind words, and to acknowledge her achievements. In a family where her accomplishments were always overlooked, her grandfather was the only one who celebrated her. And his passing left a void in her heart that she didn't know how to fill. At the funeral, the atmosphere felt colder than it had ever been. Olivia had always known that her parents' attention would be elsewhere, but this time it stung more than ever. As they arrived at the church, her mother, Catherine, clung to Ethan as though he were the only one who mattered. Her father, Robert, seemed to be fixated on Ethan as well, whispering in his ear, offering him subtle nods of approval. The same familiar pattern played out as it had always done. Ethan, the favoured son, was the centre of their universe. Olivia stood at the back of the room, watching as her parents doted on Ethan, talking to him in hushed tones, their faces lit up with admiration. It felt as though she was invisible. Her grief for her grandfather, the man who had been her protector and ally in a sea of indifference, was overshadowed by the deafening silence between her and the rest of the family. No one even acknowledged her. There was no comforting touch, no eye contact. Olivia felt like an outsider, a stranger in her own family. She had always been the strong one, the one who didn't need anyone, the one who could carry her own weight. She had long ago accepted that she wasn't going to receive the kind of love and attention that Ethan always did. But this was different. In that moment, as she stood quietly in the corner, her heart breaking for the grandfather she had lost, she felt like she didn't belong at all. The service was a blur. She had heard the eulogies, the words of sympathy from family and friends, but it felt as if she was on the outside looking in. The quiet sobs of those around her, the soft murmurs of shared grief, all seemed to pass her by. She couldn't escape the feeling that the family she had once known was gone, replaced by a tight-knit unit that had little room for her. Ethan was the one who received the spotlight, the one who was comforted by their parents, while Olivia stood in the shadows. Later that day, after the ceremony, they gathered at the family's home. Olivia watched as her parents and Ethan sat together deep in conversation, their voices low and filled with words she wasn't part of. It was as if they were in a world of their own, one where she didn't belong. Even when she tried to join them, to talk about her memories of her grandfather, they barely acknowledged her presence. Her father, Robert, had always been distant, but today his coldness stung more than ever. He spoke to Ethan in his usual upbeat tone, offering him support and advice, while Olivia was left to watch from a distance. Her mother, Catherine, as always, focused on Ethan. The way she looked at him, the admiration in her eyes, only deepened Olivia's sense of alienation. At the dinner table, Ethan spoke animatedly about his latest endeavours, his newest project, the big ideas he had, the promises of a bright future ahead. And while Olivia couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy, it was more than that. It was the painful reminder that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she had accomplished on her own, she would never be the one to receive this kind of attention. She had long stopped expecting anything from her parents, but this? It felt like a slap in the face. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself growing more and more distant from her family. It was as if the funeral had highlighted a truth she could no longer ignore. She would never be a priority in their lives. She had spent so many years trying to earn their love and approval, but nothing ever seemed to work. As the family gathered to mourn the loss of her grandfather, she felt like an outsider, a spectator in her own life. She was left with nothing but the remnants of a relationship that had never truly existed. But amidst the pain, something inside Olivia began to stir. She had spent so much time chasing after a love that would never come, a recognition that was never going to materialize. Her grandfather's passing had awakened something deep within her, a realization that she didn't need to seek validation from people who had already made up their minds about her. She had spent her life seeking approval from her parents, trying to prove that she was worthy of love, but it was clear now that it wasn't worth it. The funeral, while painful, had given Olivia a moment of clarity. She could no longer continue down this path. The years of feeling invisible, the years of trying to be someone she wasn't, were over. It was time to live for herself, to stop waiting for a family that would never understand her. It was time to let go of the past and step into a future that was hers to create. As the days following her grandfather's funeral passed, Olivia couldn't shake the heavy feeling that had settled in her chest. It wasn't just the grief of losing him, though that was a loss she felt deeply. It was the overwhelming sense of isolation, the realization that her family was always going to be focused on Ethan, and she was always going to be on the periphery. Even after her grandfather's death, it felt as though she was left out of something essential. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week, and Olivia couldn't stop thinking about it. She wasn't expecting much. She had learned long ago not to expect anything from her family. But part of her couldn't help but hope. Maybe, just maybe, her grandfather had remembered her. He had always been the one to see her, to encourage her when no one else did. But she was skeptical, wondering if this was just another disappointment waiting to happen. It was on the day before the will reading when Olivia received a letter from her grandmother. She had not heard from her grandmother since the funeral, and it was strange to get a letter from her now. Olivia opened the envelope slowly, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Inside was a short note written in her grandmother's familiar, careful handwriting. "Olivia," the letter began, "I want you to know that your grandfather made sure you're included in his will. He always saw you for who you are, and he made sure that would be recognized. Please don't let anyone tell you otherwise tomorrow. You're entitled to what he left for you, just as much as anyone else. I need you to be there. It's important." The words hit Olivia like a wave. A part of her was overwhelmed with disbelief. She had spent her entire life feeling invisible to her family, always pushed aside in favour of Ethan. Now, here was her grandmother, telling her that her grandfather had done something special for her. It was hard to believe, especially after everything that had happened, but the hope that flickered in her heart was undeniable. Could it be true? Had her grandfather really thought of her in this way? She folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling as she placed it back into the envelope. She had to go. The hope that had been reignited within her was a small but powerful force, and it pulled her to the reading. Despite her lingering doubts, Olivia knew that she couldn't pass up the chance to see if there was something more waiting for her. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though something was within reach, something that had always been out of her grasp. The morning of the will reading arrived, and Olivia felt a mixture of excitement and dread. She had no idea what to expect. Would her parents try to manipulate the situation, like they had done so many times before? Would they try to convince her that her share wasn't necessary, that it was better off in Ethan's hands? The thought of it made her stomach churn. But she had made a decision. She was going to stand up for herself, no matter what. She arrived at the lawyer's office a little early, wanting to be alone for a moment before the proceedings began. The sterile office, with its cold grey walls and high-backed chairs, made her feel small and insignificant, but she refused to let it get to her. She sat in the waiting area, her heart beating erratically as she thought about the possible outcomes. Her parents would be there soon, no doubt, and Ethan too. She couldn't help but wonder what their reactions would be when the will was read aloud. Would they be surprised? Would they be angry? She wasn't sure she was ready for either. When the door opened, she saw her parents walking in, their faces as composed as ever, though there was something cold in their expressions. Olivia's father, Robert, nodded curtly to her, but it was clear he wasn't happy to see her there. Her mother, Catherine, gave her a tight smile before sitting down next to Ethan. Ethan didn't even look up. He was busy tapping away at his phone, as though the situation didn't concern him at all. Olivia, for her part, stayed calm. She didn't let their indifference affect her. She couldn't afford to let it. She had made it this far on her own, and she wasn't going to back down now. The lawyer entered the room, a tall man with grey hair and sharp glasses, and nodded to everyone before sitting down. He cleared his throat and began the process. "The will of Mr. Frederick Whitmore," the lawyer began, his voice steady. "As per his wishes, the estate has been divided amongst his children and grandchildren, with a portion allocated to each of you." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was ready. She didn't flinch when her parents' names were read aloud, nor when Ethan's share was announced. But when the lawyer came to her name, she held her breath. "Olivia Whitmore," the lawyer said, looking directly at her. "Your grandfather has left you an equal share of the estate." For a moment there was silence in the room. Olivia's parents froze, their expressions tight with disbelief. Ethan, for the first time, stopped scrolling on his phone and looked up. Olivia could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't look away. She held her ground, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Her grandfather had remembered her, he had thought of her. But Olivia knew this wasn't over. Her parents, as expected, would not let this go quietly. The tension in the room was palpable as the lawyer continued to read through the will. Olivia sat frozen, her mind racing, but her body still. She could feel her parents' eyes boring into her, but she refused to show any sign of fear. Her grandfather had always believed in her, and for the first time in her life, she felt something stir inside her that was stronger than the years of rejection she had endured. She didn't want to believe it, but part of her had always hoped for this moment, the moment when her grandfather's love for her would be more than just words. But just as she thought she might be able to breathe, her father, Robert, interrupted the lawyer. His voice was smooth, yet there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Well, we'll be accepting Olivia's portion on her behalf," Robert said, his words deliberate and calculated. "She's always been the independent one. She doesn't care about these things. We can take care of it for her. Besides, Ethan needs it more. This money will help him with his startup and his future." A cold chill ran down Olivia's spine as her father's words sank in. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. This wasn't just about Ethan needing the money. It was about their continued attempt to take control of what was rightfully hers. The inheritance that her grandfather had so carefully left her, an equal share with Ethan, was now in jeopardy. And it wasn't just about money. It was about her voice, her right to claim what had been given to her. Her heart began to race as Olivia's mind scrambled to process what was happening. She had worked so hard to get where she was, never once asking for help, and now, just as she thought she had finally earned something, her father was trying to take it away. This was nothing new. Her parents had always treated her like she was the afterthought, the one who didn't need anything. They saw her independence as a reason to dismiss her accomplishments. They saw her self-sufficiency as a weakness, as an excuse to ignore her. Olivia opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She was afraid that this time, just like so many others, she wouldn't be able to stand up for herself. But just as she was about to shrink back into the silence she had lived with for so long, a voice broke through the tension in the room. "Robert, I think we should let Olivia speak for herself," came a calm, steady voice from across the room. It was her grandmother standing up from her seat. She had been quiet for most of the reading, but now she stood tall, her eyes sharp and full of purpose. "Olivia deserves to make her own decisions," Grandma continued, her voice unwavering. "This inheritance was given to her for a reason. Let her decide what she wants to do with it. No one should speak for her." Olivia's eyes widened as her grandmother's words echoed in the room. She hadn't expected her grandmother to intervene, but now she was filled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For years she had felt invisible, but here was someone who cared enough to stand up for her, someone who wasn't afraid to confront the family she had always been a part of but never fully belonged to. The lawyer, looking somewhat surprised but relieved, nodded and turned back to the document. "I believe we should continue then," he said, looking at Olivia and giving her a reassuring smile. "As per Mr. Whitmore's wishes, the inheritance remains as it is. Olivia is entitled to an equal share." There was a long pause in the room. Olivia's parents sat frozen, their faces pale and tight with anger. Ethan, who had been so passive and disengaged until now, looked up, but he didn't say a word. Olivia felt a wave of emotion flood over her, a mixture of disbelief and relief. She had been heard, and her voice mattered. For a moment the world felt different. For the first time in her life, Olivia wasn't the one who was overlooked. For the first time, she was the one who was being defended, being seen. It was a small victory, but it was hers, and it meant more than any inheritance ever could. Her parents, however, weren't done. Her father's jaw tightened, and Olivia could see the anger boiling beneath the surface. "This isn't about Olivia," Robert said, his voice sharp. "It's about family. Ethan is the one who needs this money. He's still finding his way. He's the one who needs support." Olivia's heart clenched, but she refused to back down. She had spent so many years trying to fit into a family that had never truly accepted her, trying to win their approval. But in this moment, she realized that the only approval she needed was her own. She didn't need their validation. She had earned everything she had, and no one could take that from her anymore. "I don't need anyone to accept anything on my behalf," Olivia said firmly, her voice steady and strong. "This is mine, and I will decide what to do with it." Her grandmother gave her a proud nod, and Olivia felt a sense of strength she hadn't known she had. She wasn't the girl who had quietly accepted being overshadowed anymore. She wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. She was Olivia Whitmore, and she was standing up for herself. As the lawyer continued reading through the will, Olivia's mind swirled with possibilities. This moment had opened something inside her, something she hadn't known she was capable of. She had taken the first step, and she wasn't going to stop now. The battle wasn't over, but Olivia knew one thing for sure: she was finally ready to fight for herself. As the lawyer continued reading, Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to remain composed, but the reality of the moment was beginning to settle in. Her grandfather had done it. He had left her an equal share of his estate. The lawyer's voice echoed in her mind as he read the line that confirmed her inheritance. Her name, paired with Ethan's, each receiving an equal share. The words felt surreal, as though she had waited her whole life for this moment, but she had never fully believed it would come. For a brief moment, Olivia allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment that changed everything. Maybe her grandfather's gesture would be enough to finally break the cycle of neglect, to make her family see her for the first time in years. But as soon as the lawyer finished reading that part of the will, she saw the shift in her parents' expressions. The quiet shock on their faces quickly morphed into something else, something darker. They didn't hide their disappointment. Their eyes narrowed, their jaws tightened. They were furious. Her father, Robert, was the first to speak. "This is absurd," he muttered, his voice strained. He turned toward Olivia, his gaze cold. "We've already talked about this. You don't need this money. You've always been fine. Why do you need this inheritance? You're doing just fine on your own." Olivia's chest tightened. She had heard this before. Every time she had achieved something, gotten into a prestigious university, secured a well-paying job, bought her own apartment, it had always been the same. "You don't need us," they would say. And yet when it came to money, when it came to something that could be controlled, suddenly it was all about Ethan. Her mother, Catherine, joined in. "Madison, this isn't about you. We're just trying to help Ethan. He's the one who needs it. He's the dreamer. He's the one who's still figuring things out." Catherine's tone was sweet, deceptively so, as if her words were meant to soothe Olivia. But Olivia wasn't fooled. It wasn't about helping Ethan. It was about controlling her, controlling everything, and continuing to play favourites as they always had. Olivia's stomach churned, but this time she didn't back down. She didn't feel that familiar knot of guilt twisting in her gut. She had spent too many years being told she was strong enough to handle things on her own, and now, for the first time, she realized it wasn't about being strong. It was about being heard. "No," Olivia said, her voice calm but unwavering. "This is mine. I'm not giving it up." Her father's face turned a shade redder. "What are you talking about?" His voice rose, anger seeping into his words. "You don't need it, Olivia. You've already made it on your own. You've never needed anything from us, and now you're going to take what your grandfather left for Ethan and make it all about you?" Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but Olivia wasn't swayed by the emotional manipulation. "Olivia, please," Catherine said softly. "Think about this. Ethan needs this more than you do. You've always been fine, but Ethan—" "I don't care what you think I need," Olivia interrupted, her voice stronger now. "This is mine, and I'm not giving it to anyone." The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. Olivia's parents exchanged a look, but Olivia didn't falter. She had never felt more certain of anything in her life. The guilt, the shame, the need for approval, they had all faded away. She had spent so many years being the one who never asked for help, the one who never took what was rightfully hers. But that was over now. Her father stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "This is absurd. We raised you, Olivia. We've done everything for you, and you're going to turn your back on your own family?" Olivia met his gaze, her voice steady. "You've done nothing for me that I asked for, and now you're trying to take what my grandfather gave me. This is my choice, not yours." There was a tense pause before Olivia's grandmother, who had been sitting quietly off to the side, stood up. She had remained silent through the initial confrontation, but now she spoke, her voice commanding attention. "Enough, Robert. Catherine, Olivia is right. Her grandfather left that inheritance to her because he knew she deserved it. You both have tried to control her life for far too long, and I won't stand by and let you do it again." Her words were sharp, cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. Olivia felt a rush of gratitude wash over her. For the first time in her life, someone, her grandmother, the one person who had always seen her, was standing up for her. The lawyer, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. "Legally, unless Olivia signs a waiver, the inheritance belongs to her in full." He glanced at Olivia, who was still standing firm. "If there is no objection from Olivia, I'll proceed with the distribution." Her father glared at her, but there was nothing he could do. Olivia had made her choice. She wasn't going to let her family manipulate her anymore. She wasn't going to live her life based on their terms. This was her inheritance, and no one was going to take it from her. As the lawyer moved forward with the will reading, Olivia felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. She wasn't just inheriting money. She was inheriting something far more valuable. the right to control her own destiny. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she finally had the power to choose her own path. After the will reading, Olivia left the lawyer's office in a daze. Her mind was swirling, still trying to process the events of the past hour. For the first time in her life, she had stood up for herself. She had fought for something that was rightfully hers, and for once, she had won. But as the lawyer handed her the official documents and she signed her portion of the inheritance, a weight began to settle in her chest. The excitement that had come with her victory soon faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of isolation. It was only when she returned to her apartment that the full force of what had just transpired hit her. She had always known her family's dynamics were fractured, but now, after the will reading, she realized just how deep the rift went. Olivia had always felt like an outsider in her own family, but now she understood that she wasn't just excluded from their love. She had been pushed aside, discarded. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother, Catherine. At first, Olivia hesitated. She knew it wasn't going to be anything good. She opened the message anyway, her fingers trembling. Olivia, I hope you're happy now. You've destroyed the family. This inheritance wasn't about you. You were supposed to be the strong one, the one who didn't need anything. But instead, you've taken what was meant for Ethan, the one who truly needs it. We've always given you everything. And this is how you repay us? We expected better from you. The words hit Olivia like a slap to the face. She felt her throat tighten, a lump forming. She read the message over and over, each time hoping it would make sense, but it didn't. It wasn't just about the money. It was about her parents' complete inability to see her for who she truly was, their daughter, their child, someone who had always tried to please them, who had always worked hard for their approval. And yet here they were, accusing her of betraying the family. The message from her mother stung, but it was the second message from her father that crushed her completely. This is your fault, Olivia. You've always been the one who didn't care, who didn't need us. You're the reason this family is falling apart. You've never understood the importance of loyalty, of sacrifice. Ethan is the one who deserves this. He's the one we've always invested in. You've turned your back on all of us. The words echoed in Olivia's mind long after she put her phone down. She had expected anger, she had expected hurt, but hearing them lay the blame at her feet like this was almost too much to bear. It wasn't even about the inheritance anymore. It was about their inability to see the real her, the person who had worked tirelessly, the person who had struggled in silence while they fawned over Ethan. In the past, Olivia might have caved, might have given in to their guilt trips and their expectations, but not this time. She had made a choice that would change everything. She wasn't going to be manipulated any longer. She wasn't going to let them make her feel small or unworthy. They had never given her the chance to be anything but the responsible, invisible daughter, the one who could handle everything on her own. But now Olivia realized that handling everything on her own had come at a cost. Her sense of self had been chipped away for years, little by little, until she was no longer sure of who she was outside of her family's expectations. But now, standing in her apartment, holding the papers that proved she had a right to be seen, she realized that she had the power to rebuild. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but she could start over. She could reclaim her life, her voice, her identity. Olivia sat down on the couch, her hands trembling as she stared at the phone. The messages from her parents felt like a final betrayal. But in that moment, she understood something. She didn't need their approval. She had spent so many years chasing after it, trying to earn their love, but it wasn't worth it. No amount of success, no amount of achievement would ever be enough for them. It had never been about her at all. It had always been about them, about what they could control, about who they chose to love. The weight of it all hit her in waves. She wasn't just dealing with the fallout from the will. She was facing the painful truth that her family, the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, had never truly accepted her for who she was. They had never seen her as anything more than a means to an end, a daughter who didn't need them, who could be counted on to handle everything herself. And in their eyes, that was her downfall. Olivia stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to do something. She couldn't sit here and wallow in the hurt anymore. It was time for her to take control. It was time to let go of the family that had never truly seen her and find her own way. She needed to reclaim her freedom, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. She needed to find her own path, one where she didn't have to beg for recognition, where she didn't have to fight for the love she so desperately craved. She walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't alone. She had herself. She had her strength. She had the ability to create the life she wanted, free from the constraints of her family's expectations. And that, Olivia realized, was all she ever truly needed. Olivia sat motionless in her apartment, the weight of her family's accusations and rejection pressing down on her shoulders. She had expected their disappointment, but hearing the cruel words from her parents, accusing her of destroying the family, blaming her for their dysfunction, had hit her harder than she ever imagined. As the hours passed, she couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. She had worked so hard, spent so many years trying to be good enough for them, and now they had turned their backs on her. The realization was clear. Nothing she did would ever be enough to make them see her. Nothing would ever make them truly love her. But just as Olivia began to resign herself to the pain of that truth, she received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, but there was an urgency to it that made her sit up straight. It was her grandmother, and what she revealed was nothing short of shocking. "Olivia, I need you to listen carefully," her grandmother's voice crackled through the phone. "There's something I haven't told you. Your parents, they've been trying to manipulate your grandfather's will. They've been pushing for Ethan to be the sole heir to the inheritance, and they tried to convince your grandfather to make changes before he passed." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean, Grandma? They've been trying to change the will?" "Yes," her grandmother replied, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the revelation. "They wanted to cut you out entirely. They tried to convince your grandfather that you didn't need the inheritance, that you had everything you could ever want. They told him Ethan needed it more. They even suggested that Ethan should be the only one to inherit. But your grandfather, bless his heart, refused. He knew better. He knew you were deserving just as much as Ethan." The news struck Olivia like a physical blow. She couldn't believe it. All those years, all the rejection, the silent messages that she wasn't important enough to be recognized, and now her parents had tried to erase her from the will entirely. It was almost too much to bear. Olivia had always felt like she was the forgotten one in the family, but to hear that her parents had gone as far as to try and deny her her rightful share, to manipulate her grandfather's wishes, was a level of betrayal she hadn't imagined. Her grandmother continued, her voice firm. "I couldn't stand by and let that happen, Olivia. Your grandfather had made his wishes clear, and I wasn't about to let them erase you from his legacy. So I did what I had to do. I protected you. I made sure his will was legally binding, and I made sure you received what you were entitled to." Olivia's mind raced. She had no idea that her grandmother had been involved in such a way. She had always thought of her grandmother as a quiet observer, someone who rarely got involved in family disputes. But now she realized how much her grandmother had done for her, how much she had risked to ensure that Olivia wasn't erased from the family history. "Grandma, I don't know what to say," Olivia stammered, her emotions overwhelming her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't I know?" "I couldn't, Olivia," her grandmother said softly. "I knew your parents would never understand. They would have fought me every step of the way. I did it quietly, to protect you and to honor your grandfather's wishes. You were always his pride, and he knew how strong you were, but I couldn't let them take this from you." Olivia felt tears sting her eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel something other than anger or pain. She felt gratitude. She felt seen. It was as if a door had opened, revealing a part of her family that she had never known, a part that actually cared for her, a part that understood her worth. Her grandmother had been the one person who had always stood by her side, even when the rest of the family had ignored her, overlooked her, or tried to push her away. "I don't know what to do with all of this, Grandma," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "I've been so angry, so hurt. I don't know if I can ever forgive them." Her grandmother's voice softened, a touch of warmth in her words. "I understand, darling. It's a lot to process. But you've come so far already. You've found your voice, and now you know the truth. You don't need their approval. You have everything you need within you. And now you have something they can't take away, your own sense of worth, your place in this family." Olivia sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her grandmother's words sinking in. She had spent so many years chasing after her family's approval, but now she realized that approval would never come. What mattered now was her own recognition of her worth, her own ability to stand up for herself, to claim what was rightfully hers. The inheritance, the legacy, it was just a symbol. The real victory, the real freedom was in her own mind and heart. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, but now she understood. She wasn't invisible anymore, not to her grandmother, and certainly not to herself. "Thank you, Grandma," Olivia said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "Thank you for standing by me." "I always will, Olivia," her grandmother replied, her voice full of warmth. "You've always had my support. You just had to see it for yourself." As Olivia hung up the phone, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had always thought that her family's approval was the key to her happiness. But now, for the first time, she realized that the key had always been in her hands. In the weeks that followed the will reading, Olivia felt a shift within herself. It was subtle at first, like a light breeze that grew stronger as it swept across her life. For so long she had carried the weight of her family's expectations, or rather their lack of it. She had been raised to believe that her achievements didn't matter, that her independence was a flaw, not a strength. But now, after everything that had happened, Olivia understood that she had the power to define her own worth. She wasn't just fighting for an inheritance, she was fighting for her right to live authentically, to be seen for who she truly was. One evening, after yet another uncomfortable conversation with her parents that only reinforced how little they truly understood her, Olivia sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the silence she had come to expect. She thought about the letter her grandmother had written to her, about how she had quietly fought behind the scenes to protect her. Olivia had spent so many years seeking approval from the wrong people, but now she realized it wasn't just about money or status. It was about creating something meaningful for herself, something that reflected who she was and what she wanted to stand for. That was when the idea first struck her. She could use her inheritance to build something that wasn't just for her. She could create a foundation, an organization that would help young women who, like her, had been overlooked and undervalued by the world around them. Women who had been told they were too strong, too independent, too different to fit the mold that society expected of them. She wanted to give them a voice, a platform to show the world who they really were, just as she had fought to show the world who she was. The thought filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about the money. This was about reclaiming her sense of freedom, her right to make a difference, her ability to take control of her life and give back to others who had been in her shoes. Olivia had always known she wanted to do something meaningful, but she had never had the courage to take the first step. Now, with her inheritance in hand, she had the resources to make that dream a reality. She immediately set to work, researching ways to create the foundation she had envisioned. She met with legal advisors, spoke with people who had experience in non-profit work, and began putting together a plan. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether she was capable of creating something so ambitious. But with each step forward, Olivia grew more confident. She could feel the weight of the past lifting off her shoulders, replaced by a new sense of purpose. As the foundation took shape, Olivia began to feel a sense of freedom she had never known before. It wasn't just about the financial independence the inheritance had provided. It was about reclaiming her identity, about finding her own path in a world that had always tried to force her into someone else's mold. She was no longer the forgotten daughter. She wasn't the one who had to prove her worth to anyone. She was the one who had the power to make a difference, to create something that mattered. The first few months were a whirlwind of planning and organisation. Olivia poured her energy into the foundation, working long hours to ensure it was set up properly. She found partners who shared her vision, who believed in the importance of empowering young women who had been silenced by their circumstances. Together, they created programs that offered mentorship, job training, and educational resources to women who had faced discrimination and neglect. But the work wasn't easy. There were moments when Olivia felt overwhelmed, when she doubted whether she was doing enough or whether the foundation could truly make a difference. But every time she faced these challenges, she thought about the women who would benefit from the work she was doing, women who had been told they were too much, too loud, too different. Olivia's heart swelled with pride as she thought about the impact she could make. And as the foundation began to grow, Olivia realized something profound. The freedom she had sought, the sense of self-worth that had always eluded her, wasn't just about taking control of her finances or her family's expectations. It was about the work she was doing, the lives she was touching. For the first time in years, Olivia felt like she was living her truth. She was doing something meaningful, something that not only gave her purpose, but also allowed her to give back to others. As the months passed, Olivia's life began to change in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself surrounded by a community of like-minded individuals, all working toward a common goal of empowering women. She was no longer isolated, no longer the forgotten one. She had built something from the ground up, something that would last far beyond her own personal journey. One afternoon, as she sat in the office of the foundation, reviewing the results of a new mentorship program, Olivia felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had finally found her place in the world, a place where her voice mattered, a place where she could make a difference. She had stopped looking for approval from the people who would never see her for who she was. Instead, she had created something that allowed her to be the person she had always wanted to be. Not just for herself, but for others too. For the first time in a long time, Olivia smiled. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. As Olivia's foundation began to grow, so did her sense of purpose. The early signs were promising. Young women were enrolling in the mentorship programs, volunteers were coming on board, and the support from the community was growing steadily. She had created something meaningful, something that truly resonated with people. And with every success, Olivia felt a deeper sense of pride and accomplishment. But even as she built this new chapter of her life, there was a lingering unease, an exhaustion that sat heavy on her chest. For all the progress she had made, Olivia found that the emotional toll of the past still clung to her, like an invisible weight she couldn't shake. Every success felt bittersweet. When she saw the faces of the young women in her programs, their smiles full of hope and possibility, she felt the same hope for herself. But there were moments, fleeting but intense, when she felt the sting of her own unresolved pain. The wounds from her childhood, from the years of neglect and rejection, hadn't healed as quickly as she had hoped. As the foundation grew, so did Olivia's responsibilities. She found herself working longer hours, taking on more tasks than she could manage. She juggled meetings, fundraising events, and the day-to-day operations of the nonprofit, all while trying to keep her emotions in check. She wanted to be strong for the women she was helping, to show them that anything was possible. But at night, when the office was quiet and the weight of the day settled over her, Olivia found herself struggling with the same feelings of loneliness and unworthiness that had plagued her for so long. It was in these moments of quiet reflection that Olivia began to ask herself difficult questions. Why was she still carrying this pain? Why did she still feel the need to prove herself to others, even when she had accomplished so much on her own? It became clear to Olivia that her drive for independence and success had been shaped by the need for validation from people who had never truly seen her. The constant striving, the endless need to do more, to be more, was rooted in the belief that if she achieved enough, if she succeeded enough, she would finally be worthy of love and approval. But after everything that had happened, after standing up for herself and receiving the inheritance that was rightfully hers, she realized that the approval she had spent so long chasing wasn't going to come from her parents, and it never would. The realization was painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time in her life, Olivia understood that her worth wasn't dependent on the approval of others. She had spent so many years seeking recognition from people who would never offer it to her. But now she knew that the only person who needed to see her value was herself. Despite the success of the foundation and the recognition it was starting to receive, Olivia began to realize that the work she was doing, while important, couldn't fully heal the emotional scars that remained. She needed to face the truth about herself, about her family, and about the years of hurt she had buried deep within her. The process wasn't easy. It meant confronting the past, acknowledging the ways in which her parents had failed her, and accepting that no matter how much she did, they would never be the parents she had always hoped for. They had never been able to see her as anything other than the strong, independent daughter who didn't need them. But Olivia had done the hard work of becoming strong on her own. She had survived the neglect, the emotional distance, and the sense of being invisible. She had created a life for herself, not because she needed her parents' approval, but because she had learned to rely on herself. The strength she had gained over the years, the independence, the resilience, was not just about surviving. It was about thriving, about using her own experiences to create something positive in the world. In moments of quiet reflection, Olivia began to understand that her independence wasn't a shield to protect her from the pain of her family's neglect. It had been her way of coping, of surviving the emotional void that had been left by the people who were supposed to love her. But now, with the foundation in place and the women she was helping, Olivia was starting to see the power of community, of connection. She had spent so long fighting alone, but she was beginning to realize that it didn't have to be that way. She could lean on others. She could be supported, just as she had supported so many others. As the foundation continued to grow, Olivia began to take time for herself. She started seeing a therapist, something she had never allowed herself to do before. She began to process the hurt, the anger, the confusion that had built up over the years. The healing process wasn't linear and it wasn't easy, but for the first time, Olivia felt like she was taking the steps she needed to truly heal. She wasn't just building a foundation for others, she was building a foundation for herself. She still had a long way to go, but Olivia felt a deep sense of peace settle over her as she worked through the emotional turmoil of the past. She didn't need her family's approval to feel whole. She had learned to validate herself, to see her own worth, and to appreciate the person she had become. And as she continued to pour her heart and soul into the foundation, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not just financial freedom, but emotional freedom. The freedom to be herself, to stand tall, and to know that she was enough, exactly as she was. It had been months since Olivia had last seen her brother Ethan. Their paths had diverged in so many ways that the thought of reconnecting had always felt too difficult, too painful. Olivia had spent years resentful of Ethan's privileged position in the family, his carefree life while she struggled to earn the smallest ounce of recognition. But things had changed, for both of them. The inheritance, the family drama, the years of emotional neglect, all of that was still in the past. But Olivia had come to a realization. She no longer needed to hold on to the anger. She hadn't expected Ethan to reach out. After all, he had always been the family's golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And yet, here he was, standing at her door one rainy evening, looking different. Not in the way that he physically had changed, but in the way he carried himself. He wasn't the same carefree, careless brother she had known for so long. There was a maturity in his eyes now, something Olivia hadn't seen before. She hesitated for a moment before opening the door. "Ethan," she said quietly, almost as if she was unsure whether he had really come to see her. "Olivia," he said softly, his voice strained with emotion, "can we talk?" She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They both stood awkwardly in the hallway for a few moments, unsure of where to begin. So much had happened, so much had been left unsaid, and neither of them knew how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. But Olivia could see the sincerity in Ethan's eyes. He wasn't here to fight or to ask for anything. He was here to talk. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I owe you an apology." Olivia blinked, stunned. The words weren't what she had expected to hear, not from him. She had always been the one to apologize, to bury her feelings, to keep the peace. But now it was Ethan who was apologizing. She wasn't sure how to respond at first. "For what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything," he replied, his voice thick with regret. "For not seeing you, for not standing up for you, for being so selfish and wrapped up in my own life that I never even thought about what you were going through." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected this conversation to go this way, hadn't expected him to acknowledge the years of hurt she had felt. She had always seen him as the favourite, the one who got all the attention, but in this moment she could see that things were not as simple as they once seemed. "I didn't know how hard it was for you, Olivia," Ethan continued, his eyes not leaving hers. "I didn't know what you were going through. I was too focused on myself, on trying to find my own way, and I know that's not an excuse, but I should have been there for you." Olivia's heart ached as she listened to him. She had always believed that Ethan had it easy, that he had been given everything while she had to fight for scraps. But now she saw the weight of guilt and regret that had been hanging over him. He hadn't been the one to choose how things turned out. They had both been products of the same family, but in very different ways. "I was angry," Olivia said quietly, her voice trembling. "I was angry because it always felt like you were the one who mattered. You were the one who got everything, and I was the one who was always overlooked. But I didn't realise until now that it wasn't just about you. It was about them, our parents. They made us feel like we were in competition with each other, like we had to fight for their love." Ethan nodded, his face filled with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. "I know. I can't change what happened, Olivia. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see everything you did, everything you've accomplished, and I'm sorry I never saw it before." The words hung in the air between them, filling the space with a quiet, heavy tension. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling a sense of release that she hadn't realised she needed. She had carried this weight for so long, and now with Ethan's apology, it felt like it was finally lifting. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was carrying the burden alone. "I don't know if I can forgive them, Ethan," Olivia said softly, her voice raw with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever forgive Mum and Dad for the way they treated me. But hearing you say this, it means something." Ethan reached out, his hand gently resting on her arm. "You don't have to forgive them right now, or ever if you're not ready. But I hope you can forgive me. I hope you know that I'm here for you, Olivia, and I'll always have your back now." The weight of his words settled over Olivia like a comforting blanket. It wasn't a solution, not by any means. There were still so many unresolved feelings, so many wounds that would take time to heal. But this moment, this conversation, felt like the first step toward mending the broken pieces of their relationship. "I didn't realise how much I needed to hear that," Olivia whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." For the first time in a long while, Olivia allowed herself to cry. The tears weren't just for the hurt of the past. They were for the possibility of a new beginning, for the chance to rebuild something with her brother, something that had been lost long ago. As Ethan sat beside her, offering her the support she had always longed for, Olivia knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time, she wasn't walking it alone. The conversation between Olivia and Ethan stretched late into the night, their words hanging in the air, sometimes heavy, sometimes tentative, but always real. Olivia had always thought of Ethan as the carefree brother, the one who never had to worry, the one who got everything while she was left to navigate life on her own. But now, as they sat together, side by side on the couch, it was clear that Ethan's life had not been as perfect as it seemed from the outside. Ethan spoke first, his voice quieter now. "I didn't know it was so hard for you, Liv. I mean, I knew you were always different from me. But I never really thought about how much it hurt you." He paused, his eyes looking down at his hands as though trying to grasp the weight of his words. "I guess I've been so caught up in my own issues, I didn't stop to think about what was going on with you. I'm sorry." Olivia could feel the sincerity in his voice, but it wasn't just his apology that touched her. It was the fact that Ethan was finally seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time in their lives. He wasn't just acknowledging her pain, he was understanding it. "I always thought you had it easy," Olivia confessed, her voice trembling slightly, "that everything just fell into place for you. You got the attention, the praise. I worked so hard to earn anything from Mum and Dad, and it was never enough. I felt invisible. And no matter how hard I tried, it seemed like you could do whatever you wanted and get away with it. But that was just me, thinking I was the only one who felt this way." Ethan nodded slowly, as if the weight of her words was sinking in. "I didn't know, Liv. I didn't know what you went through. All these years, I just thought I was the one who had it hard. But I was wrong. I had my issues, sure, but I never understood that you were fighting a battle I didn't see." Olivia felt a lump rise in her throat, and she quickly blinked away the tears that threatened to spill. For so many years she had carried this burden alone, the resentment, the anger, the sense of being unloved. But now, here was Ethan, admitting that he had been struggling too. It wasn't an easy thing for him to admit, but hearing him say it, hearing him acknowledge her pain, was more than she could have ever hoped for. "Do you remember when I was in college?" Olivia asked softly, her voice distant as she recalled the years she spent working herself to the bone. "I thought maybe when I graduated, when I had my degree, when I bought my own place, maybe they'd see me, maybe they'd be proud of me, but it never came. They never came to my showcase. But they drove 6 hours for your drone competition." Ethan shifted in his seat, his discomfort evident. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come at first. I never knew, Liv. I never saw how much you were trying to prove yourself. I saw the success, but I didn't see the hurt. I didn't see you struggling to get their attention, and I should have." A deep silence settled between them, but it wasn't a heavy silence. It was a moment of mutual understanding, a moment where they were finally able to see each other as they truly were. Not as the roles their parents had assigned them, not as the golden child and the overachiever, but as siblings who had both been affected by the same toxic family dynamic. "I don't know if I can ever forgive Mum and Dad for what they did," Olivia said quietly, "for making us feel like we were in competition with each other, for always putting you above me. But hearing you say this, it means a lot. I don't know what happens next, but I think maybe we can start to heal together." Ethan reached out, his hand resting on hers. "I want that too, Liv. I don't want to keep living like this, with all this stuff hanging between us. I know I've made a lot of mistakes, and I know I can't change the past, but I want to change the future." Olivia squeezed his hand, feeling a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Ethan looked at her, his expression serious but hopeful. I want to go back to school. I've been thinking about it for a while now. I know it's been a long time, but I want to get my degree. I want to do something with my life, something that actually matters. Maybe I didn't have the same path as you, but I don't want to keep living like I'm still lost. I want to find my way, and I think I need to start over." Olivia stared at him, a mix of surprise and pride welling up inside her. She had never imagined Ethan, the carefree brother, would make such a decision. But in that moment, she saw a new side of him, a side that was willing to take responsibility, a side that was ready to take charge of his own future. "That's amazing, Ethan," Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you." Ethan smiled, the weight in his eyes lightening. "Thanks, Liv. I think I've finally figured out what I need to do, and I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. We've both been through a lot, but I think we can find a way to fix things, not just with Mum and Dad, but with each other. Maybe we can start over too." Olivia felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release, of healing. For the first time in a long time, she felt the burden she had carried for so many years begin to lift. There was still work to be done, still pain to process, but this was a beginning, a new chapter for her and for Ethan. "I'm ready," Olivia whispered. "Let's rebuild, together." As they sat in the quiet of the evening, side by side, Olivia felt a sense of peace settle within her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. She had Ethan by her side, and she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. As the months passed, Olivia's foundation grew stronger. What started as a vision, an idea to help women who had been silenced by society and neglected by their families, was now a thriving organisation that reached hundreds of young women in need. The mentorship programs flourished, job training initiatives expanded, and the resources she had worked so hard to gather were beginning to make a tangible impact. But beyond the external growth of the foundation, there was something even more profound happening within Olivia. She had finally started to heal. It wasn't an easy journey. There were moments when the weight of her past felt suffocating, when the memories of being ignored, neglected, and undervalued by her family resurfaced like a flood. But Olivia had learned to face those moments with a quiet strength. She had learned to allow herself to feel the pain without letting it consume her. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was embracing it, acknowledging the hurt, and allowing it to become part of her story without letting it define her. The healing was a gradual process. At times, Olivia would feel the anger, the resentment, and the sadness well up inside her, but instead of letting those emotions spiral out of control, she learned how to channel them into something positive. She found solace in the work she was doing. Helping these young women, guiding them, teaching them, and watching them thrive, helped Olivia understand the value of compassion, of resilience, and of forgiveness. Through helping others, she helped herself. One afternoon, as Olivia sat in her office reviewing reports from the Foundation's latest outreach programs, she was interrupted by a knock on the door. She looked up to see her brother Ethan standing in the doorway. He had been a regular presence in her life over the past few months, and their bond had only deepened since their conversation. They had started to rebuild their relationship, and every day Olivia felt more and more like the sister she had always wanted to be. "Hey," Ethan said with a smile, stepping inside. "Got a minute?" Olivia returned the smile, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Of course. What's up?" Ethan sat down, his usual easygoing demeanour replaced with something a little more serious. He looked at Olivia for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts before speaking. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said quietly. "I know I've messed up a lot, and I didn't always understand what you were going through. But I see you now, Olivia. I see everything you've done, everything you've built, and I'm proud of you. I never said it before, but I am." Olivia's throat tightened, the sincerity in his voice striking a chord deep within her. She had spent so many years waiting for this moment, for Ethan to see her, to acknowledge her pain, and to offer her the validation she had longed for. And now, here he was, doing just that. She had learned to accept her own worth, to understand that she didn't need her family's approval to validate who she was, but hearing him say those words filled a void she hadn't known still existed. "Thank you, Ethan," Olivia said, her voice soft. "It means more than you know." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, both of them aware of how far they had come. There was still so much to work through, but the foundation they had started to build, both in their relationship and in their lives, was stronger than ever. Olivia felt a quiet sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She didn't need her parents to be proud of her anymore. She had built a life that was meaningful, not just for her, but for others as well, and that was enough. Later that evening, after Ethan left, Olivia sat by the window in her apartment, gazing out at the city below. The skyline glittered with lights, but for the first time, Olivia wasn't focused on what the city could offer her. She was focused on what she had created, a life she had built for herself. She had created something that mattered, something that helped others. The foundation wasn't just a testament to her work, it was a testament to her resilience, to her ability to rise above the hurt and create something beautiful from it. She had faced the ghosts of her past, and while they would always be a part of her, they no longer held power over her. She had come to terms with the reality of her family's dysfunction. Her parents' inability to truly see her, their failure to offer her the love and support she deserved, was no longer something that defined her. Olivia had created her own family, a family made up of the women she helped through the foundation, the friends she had made along the way, and yes, even Ethan. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about the connections you built, the people who saw you for who you truly were, and the ones who stood by you even when things got tough. Olivia had learned that family could be chosen just as much as it could be given. And for the first time, she felt like she had a family that truly saw her, not as the strong, independent one who needed nothing, but as someone worthy of love, support, and recognition. As the years went on, the foundation continued to thrive, expanding its reach to even more young women who needed guidance, mentorship, and a sense of purpose. Olivia had not only changed her own life, but the lives of so many others. She had found peace with the past, hope for the future, and the strength to continue moving forward. Olivia's story wasn't one of perfection. It wasn't a fairy tale where everything was fixed in an instant. It was a journey of self-discovery, of facing the harsh truths of the past, and of embracing the power to create a new future. And as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, she knew that this was just the beginning. As the months passed, Olivia and Ethan continued to rebuild their relationship, but it was no longer the same. The old feelings of competition and resentment slowly faded, replaced by a bond that was based on mutual understanding and respect. They began to spend more time together, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when old habits resurfaced. When Olivia would feel that familiar pang of jealousy, or when Ethan would fall back into his old patterns of avoiding responsibility. But they worked through it, slowly and steadily, learning how to communicate without the baggage of their childhood. It wasn't perfect. There were still times when they would slip into their old roles, when Olivia felt like the one who had to be the strong, independent sister, and Ethan felt like he was the one who needed to be coddled and guided. But those moments became fewer and farther between. They were learning how to support each other without falling back into the toxic patterns that had plagued their relationship for so long. One of the first things they did together was start attending family gatherings again, something they hadn't done in years. Their parents, still trying to maintain their control over the family, were uncomfortable with the changes. Robert and Catherine were no longer the centre of their world, and they didn't quite know how to handle it. But for Olivia and Ethan, the family gatherings became a chance to rewrite the rules, to define their own version of what family meant. At one of those gatherings, after months of tense but hopeful interaction, Olivia had a breakthrough. She realized that her family didn't have to be defined by blood alone. Family could be about the people who truly saw you, who accepted you for who you were, even with all your flaws and mistakes. She had spent so many years feeling like she was missing out on something, like she had been cast aside by her own flesh and blood. But now she understood that family wasn't just about the people who shared your name. It was about the people who were there for you, the ones who supported you, who loved you, no matter what. As the evening wore on, Olivia and Ethan found themselves sitting together at the kitchen table, talking and laughing like they hadn't done in years. There was no competition, no bitterness, just two siblings who had finally come to terms with their past and were ready to move forward. It was a moment of quiet joy for Olivia, a moment that solidified her belief that family wasn't always what you expected it to be. "I'm glad we're doing this, Ethan," Olivia said, her voice full of sincerity. "I never thought we'd be able to get here, but I'm glad we did." Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "Me too, Liv. It's not perfect, but it's real, and I think that's what matters most." Olivia nodded, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't known in years. For so long she had chased after approval, after validation, after something that would fill the emptiness she had felt inside. But now she realized that the most important thing was to accept herself, to understand that she didn't need anyone else's approval to be worthy. The love and support she had from Ethan, from her friends, and from the women she helped through the foundation, that was enough. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the house fell into a comfortable silence, Olivia sat on the porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the stars. She thought about the journey she had been on, about all the pain she had endured and all the growth that had come from it. There had been so many moments of doubt, so many times when she thought she would never be able to break free from her past. But now, here she was, standing on the other side, stronger and more sure of herself than she had ever been. She didn't need her parents to validate her. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She had built a life for herself, a life filled with purpose, filled with people who truly cared about her and saw her for who she was. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt at peace with who she had become. She smiled to herself, knowing that the future was wide open. There would always be challenges, always be moments of doubt and struggle, but she was no longer afraid. She had faced her past, had confronted the wounds that had held her back for so long, and she had come out on the other side stronger, more whole. "Family isn't just blood," Olivia whispered to herself, the words full of quiet conviction. "It's the people who choose to stand by you no matter what." And as she sat there looking out at the stars, she knew that she had finally found her place in the world. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living for herself, for the women she helped, for Ethan, and for the future she was building one step at a time.